The first rays of morning sunlight filtered gently through the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot of Maple Road Diner. Inside a sleek black Mercedes, Simon Cross sat still, his gaze locked on the place that had once been his proudest achievement over the past 12 years. The chrome lettering on the front of the building still gleamed under the sunlight, but its shine could no longer mask the knot of unease tightening in his chest. Just this past week, 3 dismal 3-star reviews, a warning from the health department, and customers walking out before their meals were even finished. Something was festering inside the heart of what used to be his flawless empire, and Simon knew he couldn't afford to be a passive observer any longer. Adjusting his awkward fake mustache, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror and took a slow, deliberate breath. The delivery driver uniform felt foreign against his skin, a world away from the custom suits he usually wore. But when the legacy you've poured your soul into stands on the brink of collapse, sometimes you do what you once thought unimaginable. Years ago, he had rescued Maple Road from the brink, transforming it from a run-down greasy spoon into the town's go-to breakfast destination. A place known for its charm, aroma of fresh coffee, and the warmth that brought people together. He wasn't about to let it fall apart now, not because of complacency or misplaced trust. The bell above the door gave a faint chime as Simon stepped inside, a weathered canvas bag slung casually over one shoulder. The familiar blend of coffee and bacon grease filled his nose instantly, stirring long-buried memories of the early days when he stood behind that same line. But now, laced within the familiar comfort was something off, an acrid, musty undertone, subtle but wrong. A quiet alarm began ringing inside him. "You the new delivery guy?" A coarse voice barked from the back. Rudy Martinez, Simon's head chef, the man he'd once trusted implicitly, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his calloused hands on a stained apron. His face, deeply lined, wore its usual permanent scowl. "About time. We've been slammed all morning." Simon nodded, lowering his voice into a gravelly tone. "Yeah. Name's Rick Thompson." The alias fell from his lips stiffly, even to his own ears. "Rick, grab yourself some coffee and stay the hell out of the way," Ruddy grunted, turning back toward the kitchen without a second glance. "And don't touch anything in my kitchen unless I say so." Pouring a mug from the staff pot, Simon leaned against the counter and took in the morning rush with fresh, discerning eyes. The waitresses still moved with the smooth coordination of seasoned pros, but their expressions betrayed small, fleeting signs of discomfort. Furrowed brows when certain dishes came up, tight smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Margaret, his most loyal server, with nearly a decade of service, quietly scraped something questionable off a plate before setting it down at table 6. Simon's heart sank. And then he saw him, a young man at the prep station, moving with such deliberate grace it was almost mesmerizing. While other cooks chopped vegetables with mechanical repetition, this man wielded his knife like a painter with a brush, each motion purposeful, fluid, and impossibly precise. Onions fell away in perfect julienne strips, carrots became flawless brunoise cubes. His hands didn't just move, they danced, as if guided by muscle memory etched into his bones over years of training. Simon leaned toward Margaret as she passed. "Who's the new guy?" "Nick Dane," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the kitchen as if afraid of being overheard. "Started last week, keeps to himself, but my God, that boy can cook. Too bad Rudy treats him like trash." Simon watched Eric more closely, increasingly drawn to the quiet intensity that radiated from him. There was something heavy in his eyes, an ache, a shadow, that didn't belong on someone who looked barely 30. His knife skills weren't learned from culinary school alone. They were born from experience at the highest levels, tempered by hardship. Later that day, during the lunch lull, Simon lingered near the pass. Eric was prepping ingredients for dinner, each cut as meticulous as the last. But now Simon noticed the subtle tension in his jaw each time Rudy barked a command, the barely perceptible flinch in his shoulders when Rudy criticized him. "This ain't no five-star place, college boy," Rudy growled during one exchange. "We move fast and cheap here." Eric's grip on the knife tightened, knuckles turning white, but he simply nodded and resumed his work. Something deep inside Simon stirred. A wave of fierce protectiveness, almost paternal. Eric's quiet endurance in the face of mistreatment brought back memories of Simon's own rough beginnings, when he too had been the underdog, clawing for respect in kitchens that chewed people up and spat them out. That night, back in his office, Simon dug into Eric Dane's past. What he found chilled him to the bone. Eric hadn't always been a line cook hiding in a roadside diner. At 26, he was a rising star, head chef at the prestigious Meridian restaurant in the city. His signature dish, deconstructed lobster bisque, had earned him a James Beard nomination. Then, the nightmare. 37 guests hospitalized with food poisoning traced back to one of Eric's seafood specials. The health department pointed to contaminated shrimp. The media had a field day. Photos of Eric leaving the courthouse flooded the front pages. Overnight, his reputation collapsed. But as Simon sifted through archived articles, he noticed something strange. Eric had maintained his innocence the entire time, swearing he never touched that batch of shrimp. Back then, no one listened. His protests were drowned out by scandal, legal spin, and corporate self-preservation. Simon leaned back in his leather chair, the pieces of a much darker puzzle beginning to fall into place. A culinary prodigy ruined by a food safety scandal, now quietly working in a struggling diner under a false identity. But Simon's instincts told him there was more to the story. Something buried deeper. The next morning, still disguised, he returned to the diner. But now his gaze on Eric wasn't just curious. It was filled with respect and a gnawing guilt. Eric arrived early as always, meticulously inspecting each ingredient, sniffing, pressing, testing, like a soldier inspecting the battlefield that had once broken him. His hands were not simply cautious, they were haunted. What had once looked like perfectionism now revealed itself as trauma, not fear of failure, but fear of repeating a tragedy. And as Simon observed more closely, he saw something far more sinister. Rudy had a habit. He would shuffle questionable ingredients between fridges when no one was looking. Produce set aside by Eric would mysteriously return to prep stations. The milk that smelled slightly off would disappear from one shelf and show up hours later on another. And the way Rudy watched Eric, it wasn't supervisory, it was predatory, calculating. Like a man preparing for the moment his trap would spring shut. Simon felt it in his gut. Something was wrong, and for the first time in years, he realized his kitchen wasn't just broken. It was dangerous, and the man who once helped him build it might be the one responsible for tearing it apart. Simon's instincts were screaming this was about more than a few bad online reviews. The rot wasn't just in the food. It had seeped into the moral fabric of the kitchen itself, the very heart of what he once trusted without question. That evening, just as he was preparing to leave, Simon caught Eric's voice coming from the alley behind the diner. It was quiet, cracking under the weight of something too heavy to hold in. "Yeah, I know I'm late on rent again, Mom, but I can't keep running. This is the furthest I've ever gone. Maybe here I can start over. Maybe here nobody remembers the name Eric Dane." Simon felt a knot twist in his gut. A broken young man, carrying scars invisible to the world, searching for a sliver of redemption in anonymity. And yet, a question surfaced in Simon's mind like a cold splash of water. Was Eric truly a victim trying to atone for a past mistake? Or was there still something darker hiding beneath the surface? As he drove home that night, that question haunted him. Eric's arrival at Maple Road felt too precise to be coincidence. Something didn't add up. And if his instincts were right, the rot inside his kitchen ran deeper than spoiled produce or rude customer complaints. This was only the beginning, and Simon had no idea how steep the price might be to uncover the truth. The third morning of Simon's covert investigation began under a heavy, oppressive heat, as if the atmosphere itself sensed the tension hanging over Maple Road Diner. He arrived early again, positioning himself near the coffee station, close enough to observe, far enough to remain unnoticed. "Morning special for table 12, Margie's voice rang out as she slid the order ticket across the pass. The dish, a Maple Road signature, 2 over-easy eggs, thick-cut bacon, crispy hash browns, and toast, had always been a symbol of honest simplicity. Simon had eaten it hundreds of times, never once questioning how it was made. But today felt different. Eric moved to the egg station, his hands steady, his motions fluid. Yet the moment he opened the egg carton, his expression changed. He winced, holding one egg up to the morning light pouring through the kitchen window. "These eggs are spoiled," he said, voice sharp and clear, slicing through the background chatter like a blade. "Cloudy whites, foul smell. We can't serve these." Rudy's head snapped up from the grill, fire flashing in his eyes. "What the hell did you just say?" he growled, each word clipped and dangerous. "Rotten eggs," Eric repeated, holding the carton for everyone to see. "We can't feed this to customers." Simon's heart pounded in his chest. Around the kitchen, other staff exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. "You don't get to make that call," Rudy roared, storming away from his station toward Eric like a charging bull. "I've been running kitchens since before you could hold a damn spatula. The heat kills everything." "That's not how food safety works," Eric replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "Not all bacteria can be neutralized by cooking. These eggs could send someone to the hospital." The kitchen went completely still. The only sound was the soft sizzle of bacon in the background. Simon leaned in, eyes locked on the scene. This was it, the moment of truth, the crack in the facade. "Listen, you arrogant little punk," Rudy hissed, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper as he closed in. "You think just because you went to some fancy culinary school, you know better than me? I've kept this place alive for years while little prima donnas like you come and go." Eric's jaw clenched, and in that moment Simon saw something flicker in his eyes, a fire reigniting, something that had long been extinguished by shame and self-doubt. "No," Eric said, voice like steel. "I'm not serving tainted food. Not again." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Simon froze. "Again?" The implications slammed into him. Could it be? Could Eric have been guilty all along? Rudy's lips curled into a cruel grin. "Oh, right. You're that chef. The one who sent 3 dozen people to the hospital, and now you want to lecture me about safety?" Eric paled, but didn't back down. Instead, he turned to face the entire kitchen, and his voice rose so clearly it reached into the dining room beyond. "You want to talk about food safety," he said, voice echoing with both fury and pain. "Look around. Milk that expired 3 days ago is still used in coffee. Ground beef sits out at room temperature for hours. There's mold on the cheese in the walk-in, and I've watched you scrape it off and serve it anyway." Conversation in the dining room quieted. Customers began turning their heads toward the kitchen. Simon's stomach twisted as Eric continued, his voice a crescendo of truth. "The cutting boards haven't been sanitized properly in weeks. Cross-contamination happens every single day, and these eggs," he lifted the carton again, "have been sitting in a broken refrigerator for God knows how long. The thermometer's broken and nobody's fixed it. Because it's cheaper to serve garbage and hope no one gets sick. Rudy's face turned beet red. "You done here," he screamed. "Pack your knives and get the hell out of my kitchen." "Your kitchen?" Eric laughed bitterly. It was the sound of a man who'd had enough. "This isn't a kitchen. It's a ticking time bomb waiting for the health inspector to give it a name. And I'm not going anywhere. At least not until I finish what I came here to do." Simon couldn't stay silent any longer. Against every instinct, he stepped forward. Reaching for one of the eggs Eric had rejected, he cracked it open into a bowl. The smell hit instantly. Sulfurous, rancid, enough to sting his eyes. "Jesus Christ," Simon whispered, his disguise forgotten, his voice raw with disbelief. "See?" Eric's voice trembled with emotion, turning to face the stunned kitchen crew. "This is what I've been trying to stop. It's why I've kept quiet, hoping things would change. But I can't watch people get poisoned. Not again. I won't be responsible for another outbreak." Chaos erupted. Some staff nodded, emboldened by Eric's stand. Others looked terrified, clinging to silence. But Simon saw only Eric standing in the eye of the storm, no longer a fugitive from his past, but a man reclaiming his future. Customers began to leave. Maple Road Diner would never be the same. Simon knew it in his bones. This moment wasn't just about Eric's redemption. It would shape the soul of his entire restaurant. As the commotion died down, Simon, still in disguise, slipped out the back. There, he found Eric leaning against the brick wall, hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. "Stated that took guts," Simon said quietly, his voice no longer altered. Eric turned, startled. His eyes were weary. "I lost my job," he said simply, "but I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't be the reason someone got sick." "You did the right thing," Simon said, nodding. "Trust me." That night, Simon sat at his desk, surrounded by files, security footage, and invoices. If what Eric said was true, there had to be proof, and he was going to find it. He scanned weeks of footage he had never thought to review before. What he saw ignited fury. Rudy arriving early each day, pulling expired items from discard bins, relabeling dates, planting bad ingredients in prep stations to later discover them and blame others. Worse yet, supplier logs revealed ghost invoices, double charges, backdoor deals. Rudy had turned Maple Road's kitchen into his personal ATM, exploiting Simon's trust. And then came the most chilling part, the employee files. In 3 years, 12 skilled cooks had been hired and fired. All followed the same pattern. They raised concerns, and days later, were caught with spoiled ingredients planted by Rudy. Marcus, Sarah Chin, James Rodriguez. One by one, their careers were ruined by a man manipulating the system. Simon gripped his phone, dialed a number he hadn't touched in years. "Hello, this is Sarah," a woman answered cautiously. "Herman's Chin," Simon said, his voice firm. "This is Simon Cross, owner of Maple Road Diner. I'd like to ask you about your time working here." A long pause. "I signed an NDA," she replied, guarded. "I'm not calling as Rudy's lawyer," Simon said carefully. "I'm calling as someone who believes you were wronged." A tense silence followed on the line before Sarah's voice came quietly. "What do you want to know?" Her account felt like reliving a nightmare. She had been the most meticulous cook in the kitchen, routinely checking expiry dates, rigid about protocol, but the moment she raised questions about seafood supplies, everything changed. "He treated me like I was trying to poison customers," she said. "Calmed morning I found expired cream in my prep station. I'd never seen it before. Rudy accused me of deliberately putting bad food out. He kept bringing up that city chef scandal. He never named names, but he clearly meant Eric." Simon gripped the phone tightly. This was the last missing link. It became clear. Rudy's animosity toward Eric was no coincidence. Simon dug into Meridian's old coverage and discovered the parent company, Hartwell Hospitality Group. He checked their records and found Rudy had been the head chef at Coastal Kitchen, a sister restaurant to Meridian. 3 months after the poisoning scandal, he'd been fired for major health violations. Simon sank into his chair, his mind reeling. Everything made sense now. Rudy didn't just want to destroy Eric again. He might have been the one behind that original outbreak. And now, he was in position to ruin Eric's fresh start. Early the next morning, Simon made 2 crucial phone calls. First, to Eric, requesting a private meeting that afternoon. Second, to a private investigator he had used to vet business partners. "I need a full background on the Meridian poisoning from 5 years ago," Simon said, his voice cold as steel. "Focus on one name, Rudy Martinez. I want the truth about his role." When he hung up, resolve washed over him like an icy wave. Eric Dane had spent 5 years fighting false accusations alone. Now, he had an ally, a man with the resources and determination to uncover the truth. For their meeting, Simon chose Riverside Park, a secluded spot by the river, away from eavesdroppers. Eric arrived exactly on time, trading his chef's coat for a worn leather jacket and faded jeans. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed, evidence of nights haunted by loss and guilt. "I appreciate you trying to help," Eric said, as they settled onto an old wooden bench. "But you can't change anything. It always goes the same way. Speak up, get fired, cycle repeats." Simon let his real voice come through. "What if I told you this isn't coincidence? What if I told you Rudy Martinez targeted you specifically?" Eric froze, eyes wide. "What are you talking about? And who are you really? You're not a delivery guy." Simon inhaled deeply. "I'm Simon Cross, the owner of Maple Road Diner." Eric's face drained of color. "You're the owner?" "Yes," Simon nodded. "I disguised myself because my restaurant is failing, and I needed to find out why. But this isn't just about bad reviews anymore. It's about you, Eric." Simon leaned forward, his tone honed and unwavering. "Rudy worked for Hartwell Hospitality, the same company that owned Meridian." Eric sprang up, pacing to the water's edge, turning his back. "No, I worked with him. I'd have recognized him. Was at Coastal Kitchen, a sister restaurant to Meridian. He was fired 3 months after that scandal for serious safety violations." Eric let out a slow breath, his frame stiff. When he spoke again, his voice was low and hollow. "That night, I never handled the shrimp. I told everyone, but nobody listened." He closed his eyes. "The tainted batch came in while I was on my first break, after 14 hours straight. I came back and they were already prepping it. I didn't know who did it. That night was chaos. A private event for 200 guests, plus regular diners. They brought in temp cooks from other Hartwell kitchens." His fists clenched. "But my name was on the ticket. I was the executive chef. I signed off. I took all the blame." Simon nodded, snapping the pieces together. "Those borrowed cooks, were some from Coastal Kitchen?" Eric nodded. "Yes. Then they left. I was the only one left. The only one they could scapegoat." "Did you think someone might have set you up?" Eric laughed, a painful hollow sound. "Of course. But who would believe me? A young cook with no proof, spouting conspiracy theories?" Simon stood and moved closer. "What if I told you Rudy has done this before? At least a dozen other cooks over the last 3 years." Eric turned, his face ashen. "You weren't the only victim, Eric," Simon said quietly. "You were the first, the blueprint for his future sabotage." Eric slumped onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. I still thought it was my fault. Even knowing I didn't handle that shrimp, I thought maybe I messed up. You were used, Simon said softly. That investigation was a cover-up. Hartwell needed someone to take the fall to save their name. Young, promising, perfect. Scapegoat. Why would Rudy do that? What did he gain? Simon's eyes hardened. Power. Money. Maybe he saw you as a threat, or he was running his own scheme at Coastal Kitchen and you were going to uncover him. You represented everything he wasn't. Integrity, talent, standards. Eric looked up, and for the first time Simon saw something other than despair. A spark of anger, a sliver of hope. You believe he really set me up? I don't just believe it, I know it, and I have the proof. Simon showed him security footage stills. Rudy relabeling expired goods, planting items in other stations. You were the prototype, but I won't let him destroy your life again. Eric's jaw set. He stood. I'll do it. Help me bring him down, Simon said, offering his hand. Get justice for everyone he's hurt, including you. Eric looked at Simon's outstretched hand, then gripped it firmly. I will. What do you need me to do? 3 days later, Simon sat in his actual office, watching the hidden camera feed. He'd spent $5,000, 0 cents, and an all-nighter installing them. But if this caught Rudy in action, it would be worth every penny. Eric had returned to work after Simon personally intervened, despite Rudy's furious protests. When Rudy learned Eric was back, he panicked. The fear in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. Phase 1 of their plan had begun. Simon spoke into his phone, watching Eric at his station. But this time, every careful inspection of ingredients was part of a deliberate trap. The night before, Simon had planted expired items where Rudy typically hid his frame-ups, behind the walk-in freezer, under the prep sink, inside extra supply bins. The linchpin, a carton of bad eggs labeled yesterday but weeks expired. Is moving, Simon whispered into the earpiece, watching Rudy approach the stash, his gaze darting around, wary. But Rudy didn't stop there. He was more methodical than Simon expected. Rudy planted paperwork, too, leaving Eric's fingerprints on the egg carton like a finishing blow. It was a carefully choreographed act, honed over years, an art of reputation destruction Rudy had wielded time and time again. As the lunch rush approached, Simon left his office and slipped back into his delivery driver disguise for the final time. He positioned himself as usual by the coffee station, heart pounding in silent anticipation. Morning special for table 6, Margie called loudly, sliding the ticket across the path. Eric stepped into position like an actor in a well-rehearsed play. He picked up the egg carton Rudy had planted, opened it, and paused, exactly as planned. These eggs are bad, Eric announced firmly, his voice resonating through the kitchen. Rudy lunged forward instantly. What did you say? They're fresh? Look, Eric said, holding an egg up to the light. It's white, milky, and foul-smelling. The odors sliced into the room. They've been sitting in a spoiled fridge for days. No way, Rudy roared, snapping back into damage control mode. Unless someone's undermining this kitchen, like how you wrecked Meridian 5 years ago. The room froze. Eric stood his ground at this time, steadfast. I never sabotaged anyone, he said calmly. 37 people got sick because of you. You lie, Rudy yelled, eyes wild. You're spinning stories again. Show me yesterday's egg logs, prove it. Simon took a step forward, a slight, confident smile on his face. I can do much better than that. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the kitchen's display TV. Usually reserved for orders, video appeared on screen. crisp footage of Rudy retrieving the rotten eggs from their hiding place and planting them at Eric's station. "It's all here," Simon announced, voice echoing through the diner. The screen continued. In loop after loop, staff and patrons watched in stunned silence as Rudy relabeled expired goods, tampered with ingredients, and framed multiple cooks. The evidence was overwhelming. "This is Rudy Martinez," Simone declared. "He's destroyed Maple Road's integrity for 3 years, and he's the one who ruined an innocent chef's career 5 years ago." Rudy backed away, pressing his back against the prep counter. "You can't prove anything. The video can be edited." Simon brought forward a thick stack of files. "I've got ghost invoices, health department complaints, and sworn statements from a dozen cooks you sabotaged." Rudy crumbled. "You don't understand. Restaurants are cutthroat. Everyone cuts corners. You crossed the line," Simon cut in coldly. "You destroyed lives. And Eric didn't touch that shrimp at Meridian. You did. You from Coastal Kitchen." Eric stepped forward for the first time to confront the version of himself haunted by injustice over the last 5 years. "It ends now, Rudy. No more innocent lives damaged by your greed." Sirens wailed in the distance. The police. Simon had already called them. Rudy's empire collapsed in that moment. 6 months later, Simon stood alone in the exact spot he once sat in his Mercedes, thinking through the Undercover charade. But Maple Road was a different world now. Morning sunlight streamed through spotless windows, stainless steel gleamed, herbs and artisanal bacon scents floated in the air. "Order up," Eric called out confidently from the pass. Gone was the broken young man, now a poised executive chef in a pristine white coat with his name embroidered. His eyes sparkled with purpose and redemption. The media buzzed after Rudy's arrest. From local newspapers, state TV, and national food journals, Chef exposes 5-year conspiracy blazed across the cover of Culinary Arts Weekly. The Food Network called twice, eager to feature Eric's story of triumph and vindication. But the real victory wasn't headlines. It was the full dining room each morning. Guests who came not just for the food but to support a restaurant built on integrity, not shortcuts. "Chef Eric," called Margie, now the floor manager. "Table 12 wants to thank you for the morning special." Eric smiled and emerged from the kitchen to chat. His new dish, the reinvented morning special with farm-fresh eggs, hand-cured bacon, herb-seasoned garden hash browns, and homemade bread, had become a local legend. Food critics from 3 neighboring cities drove in just to taste what they were calling honest cuisine, elevated to art. Simon had spent nearly $50,000, 0 cents, upgrading the kitchen. New refrigeration, professional airflow, expanded prep areas, and the real game changer, a food safety system designed by Eric that left no room for contamination. "Mr. Cross," said a familiar voice. Sarah Chin, donning a sous chef coat that Eric had gifted her. She was one of 4 former cooks who had returned once Rudy was exposed. Reputation restored, their talents welcomed back. Simon looked around at what was once the broken heart of Maple Road, and now its clean, thriving pulse. "We did it," he thought. "We saved more than a restaurant. We saved lives." "Chef Eric wants to know if you're ready for the staff meeting," Sarah said quietly, leading Simon to the private dining area where the team had assembled. 18 employees, tripled the number from Rudy's days. Hand-picked not just for skill but shared commitment to the values that Simon and Eric had built. Bright lights reflected off hopeful faces as Eric stepped forward, grounded, confident, and unbroken by adversity. "Before we begin," Eric's voice rang out steady and clear, "I want to thank each one of you for making this place what it is today. 6 months ago, Maple Road was a candle flickering out. Now, we are the model of what an honest restaurant can and should Applause filled the room. Eric raised his hand to say more. But success means nothing if we lose sight of our purpose. We aren't just serving food. We're serving trust. Every dish leaving this kitchen carries our promise. Never compromise on quality, safety, or integrity. Simon felt his chest tighten with pride. The young man who'd once worn a false name and carried desperate hopes now stood as leader, mentor, and inspiration. "We aced the health inspection yesterday," Eric continued, holding up the framed certificate. "And more importantly, 6 months without complaints, incidents, or corners cut. That's not luck. That's built on dedication." Later, as the lunch service quieted, Simon and Eric stood side by side in the kitchen, once a battlefield, now a hall of purpose. "Any regrets?" Simon asked softly, observing Eric scanning prep tickets with meticulous care. Eric smiled, his eyes clear, free of past shadows. "Regret losing those years? Or seeing others hurt?" Simon offered a gentle laugh. "I meant looking back at everything." Eric paused, then replied, measured and bold, "No regrets. Because if none of it happened, I never would have known what real strength was. I wouldn't have learned that sometimes the worst things can prepare you for the best things." Through the kitchen window, they watched families, professionals, and food lovers from outside the town, all drawn by what Maple Road had become. In the corner booth, a young cook from a nearby city scribbled notes as Eric demonstrated his craft. Just last week, he'd begun mentoring the next generation, teaching not only culinary skill, but also honesty in the kitchen. "You know what the best part is?" Eric said, adjusting his chef's collar with quiet pride. "And what's that?" Simon asked. "Rudy's downfall became a catalyst in our industry. Chefs who were once blacklisted or falsely accused, they finally have hope. We haven't just saved Maple Road, we've ignited a movement." Simon nodded, understanding fully. Their victory reached far beyond these walls. In an industry too often marred by corruption and exploitation, they'd proven integrity and truth could overcome greed and deception. As late afternoon sunlight painted long, golden streaks across the clean kitchen floor, Simon Cross and Eric Dane stood together, restaurant owner and chef, mentor and protege. Lesson learned: the most profound victories often emerge from overcoming our deepest failures.